Welcome to the Energy Capital Podcast. I'm your host, Doug Lewin. My guest this week is Rudy Garza, President and CEO of CPS Energy. He has been in that role for the last 4 years. He's been with the utility for 13 years, holding different roles in customer services and stakeholder engagement, also on the distribution side. Rudy's a really interesting guy. He's held a number of different roles, has had a lot of policy roles over his career, going back to his days with TXU a couple of decades ago. He's an industry veteran in Texas. Really smart guy. And I think doing extraordinary things at CPS. I've really enjoyed watching his career unfold there and excited for what comes next. And we talked about that a lot on this podcast. Got into all kinds of different issues related to renewables, the purchase of 1.7 gigawatts worth of gas plants that CPS did, their efforts with energy efficiency, demand response, data center growth in CPS Energy service territory, which looks to potentially even double the size of their peak demand over the next 5 to 10 years. So very meaty dialogue and interview, and one that I think that you'll learn a lot from. This is a paid episode. The first 15 minutes or so will be free wherever you listen to your podcasts. After that, you either need to be on the Substack app or link your Substack subscription to Spotify or Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts, and then you could listen to the entire thing. If you're having any trouble at all, just go to Substack, make sure you're logged in with the email you have your paid subscription on. If you're already a paid subscriber, thank you. Your support is vital to keeping this podcast and the Texas Energy and Power newsletter going. If you are not already a subscriber, please become one today at douglewin.com. Please also leave us a 5-star review wherever you listen to your podcast. It really does help grow the audience. Thank you for listening and enjoy this discussion with Rudy Garza, President and CEO of CPS Energy, the municipal electric and gas utility for the city of San Antonio. Thanks for listening. Rudy Garza, welcome to the Energy Capital Podcast.
Thank you, Doug. It's always good to be with you, and I look forward to the conversation today.
Been looking forward to this. A whole lot going on in San Antonio and CPS Energy. I think most of our audience is pretty familiar with y'all, but just for those who may not be, give a quick intro, obviously, to yourself and the utility, but, municipal utility, about 1 million customers. You guys are quite large. Give us the 60-second version of what is CPS Energy, if you would.
Well, we're the largest municipally owned electric and gas utility in the country. We're certainly the largest municipally owned utility in the state of Texas for sure. And, we're fully diversified. We do generation, transmission, distribution, and we have the gas distribution utility as well. So we've got 1.4 million customers, actually, about 1 million electric customers. We're around 400,000 gas customers as well, and 3,600 employees. So we've got a great workforce that I think is the best in the industry at what we do in terms of our reliability. We maintain the lowest rates, combined electric and gas, in the state of Texas. We're about $177 a month on average here in San Antonio. So, we're trying to deliver our product reliably in the most affordable way possible. And we send a lot of value back to the city of San Antonio. Our owner, last year, I sent them close to $430 million of return. So I think we do a good job for our community.
Yeah. So, and just as far as the electric side, roughly what about a 6,000 megawatt peak, and you've got something like 9 or 10,000 of generation, and we're going to get into kind of how that generation mix is changing.
That's right. We've got about 6,000, a little under 6,000 megawatt peak, but that peak grows pretty consistently at 150 to last year. I think we hit 190 megawatt growth here in San Antonio. So we remain one of the fastest growing communities in the country overall, just organic growth. And that doesn't even include the data centers that are our doorstep that, we're all trying to figure out how to serve in an appropriate manner. So we've got about 8,000 megawatts of dispatchable generation, and we've got another 2,500 megawatts or so of renewables. So we are very well diversified on the generation side, and proud of the work that we've done there.
Yeah, we're going to get into talking about data centers in a minute, but let's stay with that generation portfolio and how it's changing right now. So you guys have recently done a refresh, right? You guys had made a plan a couple years ago. Obviously, the world is changing very fast. So even the best plan is going to change and evolve. Tell us a little bit about kind of where you started and how it's changed and evolved recently.
So what we realized back in 2022 when I took over November 2021, but we really got going on our Vision 2027 strategy in 2022. And the first thing we needed to do was, really talk to our community about expectations on the generation side of our business. We knew we had to continue to figure out how to serve the growth in the San Antonio and Central Texas region, and our assets were aging. We had just retired Dealey. The Bronick units were next because they were old and inefficient and needed to go.
And Dealey, Rudy, just in case for listeners that may not know, Dealey were coal plants that were built in the
Yeah,
60s, give or
60s,
take? Yeah,
50s,
okay.
60s, and we retired those in the 2018 timeframe. Our community has a climate action plan, and CPS Energy, that's a community expectation set by all our policymakers here at the city council level here in San Antonio. So we had to figure out, how we were going to do our part to meet some of those cap goals by 2050. And so we really needed to have a conversation about, do we want to stay in the coal business or do we want to transition? And I think natural gas will continue to be a part of our generation mix for the foreseeable future. But we had a conversation with our community about what could we do with the spruce units. And so that generation plan included, really moving the needle on all generation types, and also dealing with the question about spruce, which we made the decision in that time to transition Spruce 2 from coal to natural gas. And we've got an engineering project that we're working on to make that happen by 2028, give or take. And that's a question the entire state is facing, Doug. When reliability is predicated on old units that have to come on at whatever the cost is, you got to move away from those at some point in time. You can't run them
Yep,
into perpetuity because you don't know if they're going to be there
yep.
when you need them. And we saw that with our Bronick units, and quite frankly, this summer we're seeing that with our Summers units. Our Summers units have given us a really difficult time this summer, and those are the next to be retired within the next 5 years. So our generation plan really looked at the market in that moment and said, okay, how much solar is possible? How much more wind can we accommodate? What about battery storage? How are we going to get into that in a thoughtful manner? And then how much more natural gas do we need to build or buy, however we want to do it to meet our goals? And so, give or take, we had a little under 3,000 megawatts of old generation either coming offline or transitioning. And we had about 6,000 megawatts of generation to acquire or purchase or build. And that's been fundamentally the baseline of our generation plan. I will tell you, this year we are going through the process to refresh our refreshed generation plan because 3 years into a 5 year
Sure.
program,
Yeah, it's never gonna end,
yeah,
right? It's just you
right.
gotta constantly refresh.
It's
Yeah,
never
yeah,
going to end.
yeah.
Right. It's amazing. The landscape has wholesale changed since we
Yeah.
derived our original generation plan, both at the federal and the state level, and
Yes.
what ERCOT's trying to do to maximize, the efficiency of our system. So now is the time to refresh our plan, and we'll be doing that in the latter part of this year.
Very interesting. Okay, so you said a lot there, and I wanna dive a little deeper into this point about relying on very old plants, because this is obviously a big part of the discussion going on everywhere right now. So you said a couple things there. You said you retired Dealey, which were the really old coal plants. You're retiring one unit of Spruce, which was old, and then converting the other one. Braunig are these three late 1960s, right? Like Nixon, and I think one of them was built in, excuse me, two built in LBJ, one in Nixon, like all pre-Clean Air Act. Like wild how old those plants really are. Those are the Braunig plants, which are now open for a couple more years. And you mentioned the Summers plant. So one of the things I think is really important, Rudy, is that a lot of times in these discussions, and I think, this happens a lot with policymakers, it's like it's often viewed as binary, dispatchable or not dispatchable. It's 100 or zero.
Right.
But there's a wide range of different kinds of dispatchability, right? And
Right.
so, like, the further you go back in time with these old units, it can often be hard to even replace a part, right? I mean, something breaks and it's not like you just get on Amazon and order a part for a 1966 gas plant or 1970s era coal plant.
Right.
So what you guys have done, I think is really interesting. And I think frankly could serve as a model, not to say, again, it's constant iteration and evolution and you're going to have to continue to race to kind of stay ahead of that curve. But I think it's an interesting blueprint where you are adding wind and solar and batteries. You also bought some existing gas plants that were what, like 15-ish years old?
Corpus Christi and Laredo assets that we bought from Talon, and we're looking to exit the Texas market. And we got a really good deal on some assets that have another 30, 35, 40 years potentially of life on them, and allowed us to kind of push that build decision where there's a lot of construction risk, there's a lot of financial risk, those costs are going up. The cost to build have doubled since we originally did the modeling on our generation plan. They were 1250 a kW back then. They're 2200, close 2500 in some cases a kW now.
I just saw Rudy a week or two ago. There was a deal in North Dakota announced that I think it was new gas plants, and it was somewhere right around 2700 a kW.
Yeah,
Indiana and some of their regulatory filings, one of their utilities had 2500. So like in that range of 2500 a megawatt is not uncommon these days.
that's exactly right.
It basically is the price. That doubling, Rudy, we're talking what, like 3 or 4 years?
3 years.
3 years.
3 years.
Unbelievable.
Yeah, so, I mean, my goal, my job as CEO of CPS Energy is to deliver, these solutions at the most reasonable cost for our customers. So that's why the acquisition of those assets, which is about 1,700 megawatts of gas generation, was so critical. It's just a great execution of our generation plan in that moment by my team. And I couldn't be prouder of that work. But like, that's just one item that we have to look at as we continue to push the entire generation plan forward. And we've done a lot. We've got 730 megawatts of solar that are, either contracted or in production right now. And we've got another probably 600 megawatts of solar to go. And I'll continue to buy as much solar via PPAs as we can utilize. Wind, we're still working on. It's a tough market for wind right now, but we've got a 400 megawatt RP out right now, and we've got more wind that we would acquire to execute that aspect of it. And storage, we're 520 megawatts in. We got 50 megawatts that came online. There'll be another 150 megawatts that should come online next year, but we'll be over a gigawatt of battery storage when all is said and done. And of course, we're always in the market for natural gas generation as well. So that's why I get frustrated at times with the conversations in Austin and up in DC about, what's the best solution. We got to have it all for the next 5 years. There's no magic wand that's going to bring 10,000 or 20,000 megawatts of gas generation online. That's probably what the market needs. When I talk to Pablo at ERCOT, we could probably accommodate 20,000 megawatts of gas and really move the needle, but it hadn't shown up yet. So you got to take what we can get. And so I think it's just kind of a dead end conversation when, you're trying to punish renewables to incentivize natural gas. It's really not necessary
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
our economic miracle in Texas, however you want to describe that, will stop if we don't figure this out in a realistic way. I mean, there will come a time where we can pick and choose a resource. That time is not now.
Well, I mean, and even then, like, markets need to have a role in that because nobody has
Right.
perfect information or perfect wisdom. We're all lacking information, and that's what markets, I think, are really good at. I do want to talk about large loads and demand side and all this stuff, but I want to stay with generation for a minute because I think this is really interesting. To your point about the gas plants that you bought, if I'm doing the math right, you guys got them at 785 million, 1.7 gigs. We were talking about $2,500 a kilowatt for new. You got those 15-year-old plants at $500 a kW. Like, that's pretty amazing. And I think it's really just important that as people are looking at what's going on and going, oh, we can't close coal plants. Well, you can. And this is where, to your point of what's so frustrating, I get frustrated by the folks that are like, gas is everything. And I get frustrated by the 100% renewable folks too, because we need some pragmatism
Right.
in this conversation. And this is one of the reasons, Rudy, I wanted to have this conversation with you, because it seems to me like CPS is sort of an interesting example. And I actually think the ERCOT market kind of as a whole, right? I mean, people are like, oh, we're not bringing on any gas. We're actually bringing on steadily for 10 years, a gigawatt and a half per year.
Right.
The Texas Energy Fund probably accelerates that a little bit. So you guys have added some gas. You're going to close down some coal. You talked about the wind, solar, and storage. The one thing that I am kind of wondering about here is the level of growth you guys have had for solar. You guys are getting to a gigawatt, but that's on a system that's like 6 gigawatt peak, 9 or 10 gigs of total capacity. That's actually like a little behind where the Texas market is. And what I guess what I'm wondering is, particularly, and this is maybe a good segue into talking about data centers. I listened to a really fascinating podcast and wrote about it a little bit for the reading and podcast picks I put out yesterday. This podcast with Dwarkesh and Casey Hanmer. They were talking about how data centers will use solar as their predominant source of it. It'd be solar and storage, obviously. But the cost declines of solar at 40+% every time there's a doubling of solar, it hasn't really slowed down. It's still going. And so I'm wondering where you guys are looking at as you're looking at this rising load growth. You've got some gas in the portfolio now. You got at what really looks to be, based on what else is going on in the market, at a great deal. Is it time to really kind of press the accelerator on solar? Like, how are you thinking about that? And what does the math look like to you when you factor in load growth and cost?
Well, I think that again, we always want to be diversified.
Yep.
We're always going to pursue on all fronts, executing the way we've been executing. We want to get these resources at a favorable cost to our customers. And so we don't just sign any deal that comes to us. We're getting solar about as efficient as you could possibly get it from a cost standpoint for our customers. So we're adding, 100, 150, 200 megawatts at a time. And we've been able to do that and maintain the lowest rate. We're saving a lot of money every year on our fuel costs because we've been so strategic in adding solar and wind, which offsets the need to run gas or coal through our dispatchable units when those resources are there. I mean, that's a healthy way to manage the market that creates real savings for the entire market at the end of the day. So we're always going to have to reevaluate, what's our goal? I think it's healthy for any leader of any infrastructure company to have goals of what they're trying to achieve as an organization to meet the growth. I mean, our approach is we're going to add resources and we're going to grow into them. We're going to add resources and we're going to grow into them because that growth, I'm telling you, Doug, for a decade now that I've been here, the growth has been consistent
Uh-huh.
150 to 190 megawatts every year. We've grown, and that doesn't even include the data center growth, which I know we're going to get into. So I think you just have to keep an open mind about what's possible, and then when you have opportunities to sign contracts or to build resources at a favorable cost relative to the resource mix that you have, that's the way to do it in a way that doesn't break the bank for our customers. So I really like where we are, and I think our team has executed really magnificently.
Yeah, and I think the fuel cost savings are a really interesting aspect of this because obviously nobody knows which way this is going to go to the point of like what markets do, but you have to take some swags of what's going to happen. If you look at the Energy Information Administration's latest short-term energy outlook, they think gas prices are going to be somewhere in the $4 to $5 range. Natural gas prices, of course.
Right.
For the listener that's not as much of an energy nerd, not talking about gas at the pump. A lot of people probably just like freaked out, but natural gas prices at 4 to 5, and by comparison, the last 2 years, right, we've been right at like 2 or 2.50.
Right.
So those fuel cost savings you're talking about are actually considerable. And then of course, Rudy, and I want to ask you about some of what's going on in Washington with all the tax credits and all that, right? So like we're recording on Monday the 18th. Just last Friday, Treasury put out their guidance. I don't know how much you've had a chance to review it, but basically that 5% safe harbor used to be if you bought 5% of your panels or whatever, you would lock that in as being able to get the tax credit under whatever deadline. That's gone. But if you begin the project, do some kind of physical work this year, and then continue that physical work, you still get the tax credit. So it does seem like now is a really interesting time to look at. And by the way, once you get to January 1, then those foreign entities of concern type issues start to come in. Or to get the tax credit, you got to comply with that. So you've got this like 4 or 5 month window to really get these things started and keep them going. So again, just kind of wondered, like you said, you guys are getting that 150, 180 megawatt growth every year. That's before the data centers. You've got now that 1.7 gigawatts of gas. I'm going to be watching. It's going to be interesting to just kind of see like how much you guys go into solar and storage from here, because it seems like that might be the.
Thank you for listening to this free preview of the Energy Capital podcast. You can access the entire episode as well as the Texas Energy and Power newsletter archives at douglewin.com. That's DOUGLEWIN.com. You'll also be able to attend paid subscriber-only chats, and you'll receive full access to all of the Texas Grid roundups and reading and podcast picks. Please check it out, and thank you for listening.